Hey, how's it going? My name's Alan Patrick. Welcome to the Legendary Creatures Spotlight, a new series on this channel where we'll be covering a character's lore and how that lore translates onto the card. I'm excited for you guys to join me on our first spotlight around the ineffable, the Lord of Waves, the Phyrexia daddy himself, Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth's origin story begins in Dominaria during the Thran Empire. A quote from Magic the Gathering's novel, The Thran. Before the Brothers' War, before the 5 Colors of Magic, before history itself, Dominaria was ruled by the Thran. They built machines and artifacts, the likes of which have never been seen before. But amid this civilization, a shadow took root, one that would stretch its arms across space and time. The hideous evil of Phyrexia was born. And the Phyrexian evil was indeed hideous, but we're not quite there yet. We're still in that budding shadow that the Thran seems so worried about. Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth started out as a eugenicist, someone that aimed to improve the quality of the Thran's genetic population. This was common practice in the Thran Republic. Yawgmoth had a special affinity for plagues and diseases, something that would play a key role in his villainy down the line. After losing a power struggle, the Republicans, the eugenicists, and Yawgmoth were exiled. During Yawgmoth's exile, he traveled Dominaria and its many civilizations. The locals of Dominaria were not prepared for how truly ruthless and cold-hearted the Thran Physician really was. Here are just a few of his evil deeds done on his tour of atrocities. Yawgmoth had set loose the Black Cough on the dwarves of Oran Deeps, starting a workers' rebellion, nearly killing the Dwarven king, and ending a 1,000-year Dwarven rule. Yawgmoth also set the White Death on the Minotaurs of Tal Rum just to study its effects. He infected the Cat People Nation's leaders with rabies, after which they tore each other apart. And lastly, my personal favorite. Yawgmoth had set a virulent plague that ate away at the elves of Argoth. He kidnapped their priestess and her dozen healers, ordering for them to pay a ransom to have their leader returned and the cure for the plague that he had unleashed. The elves hastily paid, only to have returned to them a dead priestess, 12 dead healers, and the plague's cure. Sugar water. This guy is insane. After 5 years, the tour of atrocities had ended, when Yawgmoth was recalled back to the Thran capital, Halcyon. The people of Thran were still unaware of Yawgmoth's inhumane actions. He was called upon to heal a strange disease that the chief artificer, Glaceon, had contracted. Yawgmoth discovered that Glaceon's strange disease was caused by extensive exposure to Power Stone radiation. Yawgmoth dubbed this disease Tysis. The Power Stones powered countless Thran devices, and the Untouchables, exiled Thran that lived in the Caves of the Damned, had also caught this disease. The Untouchables formed a rebellion against the Thran, spearheaded by their leader, Gix. The rebellion was soon quelled by Yawgmoth, however. When he used metals, he was able to create a serum to cure the Tysis disease. For stopping the rebellion, Yawgmoth was rewarded by being made a member of the Council of Halcyon, and was allowed to make laws to regulate public health. I think it goes without saying that this was a bad idea. Yawgmoth, the guy that spreads plagues and diseases more casually than a Tinder hookup, is in charge of public health? That's like making the Joker in charge of law enforcement. If you're guessing this doesn't end well for the Thran, you'd be right. Gix reformed his rebellion with the Untouchables when they found Yawgmoth was diluting the serum that suppressed their Tysis. But Yawg, using an artifact, was able to control all Power Stone technology in the city, single-handedly stopping the rebellion and forcing Gix into complete obedience. During this time, Yawgmoth had a planeswalker, Dyfed, help him look for his own plane where Yawgmoth could build his own paradise. This plane was Phyrexia. This too was a gigantic, if not the biggest, error. Oh, and also, Yawgmoth wooed Glaceon's wife, Rebek, into falling in love with him, sprinkling salt onto the Tysis-infected wounds of the Thran Empire. The Thran threw a festival for Yawgmoth's heroism, but it was soon crashed by the leaders of all the different nations that Yawgmoth had experimented on during his exile, to declare war on him and anyone who stood by him. The Thran voted on whether or not they should exile Yawgmoth to ensure the city's safety. The vote came down to a 50-50 tie, with Yawgmoth himself and Rebek becoming the tiebreakers. Yawg, looking out for number one, of course votes for himself. and Rebek, enthralled by his bad boy genocidal aesthetic, votes for him and ensures that he stays. With his true colors now out on display, Yawgmoth does not hesitate to overthrow the council and imprison the other nation's leaders. Dyfed, the planeswalker/real estate agent, contacts Yawgmoth with the news she had found his new home. She had opened a permanent portal from Dominaria to Phyrexia, the plane of death and metal, exactly Yawgmoth's aesthetic. Now, it's not entirely clear how, but I guess Yawgmoth binds himself to Phyrexia's core and harnesses the entire plane's power or something, and becomes a literal god. Yawgmoth, in all his unholy grossness, brought all of the Tysis patients from Dominaria to Phyrexia. He cured them with power stones only for them to evolve into Phyrexian demons, growing longer, thinner, stronger, and faster. The Alliance of Nations in Dominaria tried to overthrow Yawgmoth, but they were no match for his Phyrexian horrors. Dyfed, now realizing Yawg was an awful tenant, turned on him. Yawgmoth stabbed her in the back of the head with a Power Stone dagger, disabling her and her spark. He planned to dissect her later to learn about her spark, when Rebek mercy killed Dyfed and removed the Power Stone. The Allied Nation War came to its peak when the Null Sphere, an artifact used to filter away deadly gases before they reached Halcyon, was sabotaged by artificers who gave their life in an attempt to overthrow Yawgmoth. With the sphere disabled, Halcyon had no protection and was destroyed, with all its inhabitants fleeing to Phyrexia or being eaten away. Yawgmoth planned to rise again when the Death Cloud lifted, but Rebek, finally seeing what a monster he was, used Power Stones to close the portals between Phyrexia and Dominaria, locking away Yawgmoth and his followers out for all eternity. Or, that was the plan. For ages, Yawgmoth used his godlike power and knowledge as a eugenicist to alter the Thran into Phyrexian demon horrors, a process now known as completion. Each generation grew more vile and powerful than the last. Using planar portals, the Phyrexians invaded and conquered many planes, but Yawgmoth was unsatisfied until he could conquer Dominaria, which he could not enter because Rebek somehow completely locked him out of it. Then came the day of the archaeologist brothers, Urza and Mishra, who disturbed the Power Stones that sealed the portal between Dominaria and Phyrexia, the Might Stone and the Meek Stone. Yawgmoth sent Gix, who was now a fully completed Phyrexian demon, through the now open portal to manipulate the brothers and start a war that would shake the plane of Dominaria to its very core. Yawgmoth's plan was to continue sowing discord with his minions from Phyrexia until it was vulnerable for a full-scale invasion. There was a few failed attempts, however, like sending in sleeper agents that didn't work because they all looked exactly the same, rightfully panicking the Dominarians who murdered all the agents they had found. Yawgmoth's plans were further set back when Urza activated a powerful blast using the Golgothian Silex, which sent Dominaria into an ice age and locked 12 planes from the rest of the multiverse, including Phyrexia. Yawgmoth was furious and, looking for a scapegoat, sent Gix down to the 7th sphere of Phyrexia, where he could be tortured for all of eternity. Urza, who died in the blast, was reborn as a planeswalker. He discovered his brother Mishra was turned into a machine and gone completely insane. Urza realized who was to blame for his brother's end and the war itself: the Phyrexians and Yawgmoth. Urza, now a planeswalker whose eyes were replaced with the Might and Meek Stones, attacked Phyrexia with a monstrous machine dragon, managing to blast a gigantic hole into the plane. Yawgmoth retaliated by invading Urza's mind and driving him more insane, forcing Urza to flee to another plane. For years, Urza was on the run from the Phyrexians, always on his heels. Yawgmoth put everything into this chase, realizing that Urza, as powerful as he was the plane's greatest threat, and an invasion could not go unpunished. Sarah, a powerful planeswalker, was able to heal Urza's insanity, but after Urza had left, the Phyrexians invaded her pure realm and corrupted it, adding one more thing onto Yawgmoth's long laundry list of evil deeds. Somewhere else in the multiverse, a planeswalker, Freyalise, desperate to undo the shard that locked 12 flames from the multiverse, casted the World Spell, finally freeing her plane, but also unknowingly opened Dominaria to Yawgmoth once again. Knowing this, Yawgmoth released Gix from his torment, since he knew more about infiltrating Dominaria and fighting Urza than anybody else. Gix was successful in infiltrating Dominaria, but he and his sleeper agents were quickly killed by the now all-powerful Urza. Yawgmoth was done with covert missions and prepared a full-blown invasion. He created his own artificial plane, Wrath. Here he could bring Dominarians of all different species, experimenting on them and creating a wide array of horror soldiers. He planned to bring his newly amassed army to Dominaria in a single moment. Urza, knowing of the coming invasion, started the Bloodline Project to defend the plane. Using Yawgmoth's damned ways against him, Urza used the theory of eugenics to manipulate breeding patterns of several groups of Dominarians to create the perfect warriors to fight Phyrexia. For generations, Yawgmoth and Urza pushed and pulled the plane of Dominaria, soon becoming a legend that echoed through time. Myths of the Lord of Wastes, a machine lord who waged eternal war on Dominaria. Yawgmoth had taken the form of a hemisphere-spanning death cloud that killed Dominaria's defenders and resurrected them to fight for Phyrexia. Things looked grim for Magic's main plane. The tides of battle finally shifted when Urza used his ship, the Weatherlight, to puncture the Null Moon, Yawgmoth's main form of protection. With Yawgmoth vulnerable for the first time, he suffered his first defeat. The injured Yawgmoth tried to flee back to his plane of Phyrexia, but the stone druids of Dominaria activated a volcano under the stronghold, covering the only remaining portal to Phyrexia in deep magma. Yawgmoth was hurt by white mana, but survived and took the form of giant tentacles that attacked the Weatherlight. Undeterred, Gerard took out Urza's gemstone eyes, the two halves of the same power stones that locked Yawgmoth and contained the spirit of Glaceon. He placed them into the cavities of Karn's chest, completing the legacy. The exact working of the legacy device is unknown, but it created a sentient light that dissolved the Yawgmoth's death cloud form, killing him at last. So there you have it, the myth of Yawgmoth, Lord of Wastes. From lowly healer to literal machine god. This story saw its conclusion June of 2001. Literally 18 years later, June 2019, Yawgmoth finally gets a card in Modern Horizons. For this next segment, we'll be reviewing the card, how well it represents Yawgmoth's character and story, and its flavor and function. Here we see Yawgmoth before he became the filthy machine god of Phyrexia. We see him as a human, probably right after returning from his exile. His table is surrounded by Thran power stones, powering the different machinery in what appears to be his lab. He's reviewing what I could only assume are notes from his horror-filled studies. As for he himself, he looks quite villainous, and does fit his description in the books. Tall, muscular with long dark hair. And on his belt you can see the symbol that would come to represent Phyrexia. I think the artist Mark Winters did an awesome job representing Yawgmoth as a supervillain here, the red sky adding an awesome touch to his villainy. As for color identity, Yawgmoth is definitely mono black. Known in the color pie for its temperament towards ambition and parasitism, things Yawgmoth embodies very well. And a 2/4 body makes sense. This is something common I see in intellectual type cards like wizards, whose power does not come from their physical stature. The first line, protection from humans, is interesting. Yawgmoth seemed truly untouchable even before becoming a god, manipulating the Thran Empire through politics and public perception. Yawgmoth was able to do his dark work and be hailed as a hero for it because of how the Empire viewed him. It also interestingly protects him from his second ability. Pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature. Put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature and draw a card. Power at any cost is a big theme in Black's color philosophy, even if that cost is your own life. Yawgmoth was not shy in using others for his own personal gain, even if that gain was pure amusement. Yawgmoth being a cold-hearted sacrifice outlet makes sense on his card, and the payoff is even better flavor. The -1/-1 counters I interpreted as his plagues and diseases that he spread to all of the nations of Dominaria. Card draw represents the knowledge that Yawgmoth gained every time he studied a new disease or plague. And finally, his third ability. Black, discard a card, proliferate. It's very common for Black to prefer cards in their graveyard. As for Yawgmoth, it reminds me of sending the Thran to his plane of Phyrexia, where he was able to work on completion, turning them into demons of metal and flesh, which is what the proliferate on the card reminds me of. Taking his artificial diseases and plagues and dialing it up to 11. Overall, I give Yawgmoth's flavor versus function a 10 out of 10 on this card, just given how well it represents Yawgmoth as a Thran councilman and how well it functions in-game. Thanks for joining me on our first legendary creature spotlight. What do you think about Yawgmoth's story and his card? Do you like that we got him as a human, or do you wish we saw him as the Phyrexian god? Let us know in the comments below. If you want to see some of these legendary creatures in action, check out our channel's gameplay videos. If you want to hear Kyle and Andy ramble about the other 99, check out the Legendary Creature podcast. If you want to see more videos like this, like and subscribe. Thank you.